How many times have you regretted putting your dreams in the hands of urgency? We live in a world that worships speed. Rush faster, chase harder, win quicker. But what if I told you that losing an opportunity could be the best thing that ever happens to you? Sounds crazy, right? Most people would never dream of missing an important interview just to help a stranger on the street. Yet, hidden in those moments we rush to avoid, life often hides its greatest treasures. Today, you'll hear a story that will flip your entire idea of success upside down. A young woman, a missed interview, and a stranger who looked like he had nothing to offer until he changed everything. Get ready to be moved, frustrated, inspired, and surprised. Because in the end, real success isn't about how fast you run. It's about having the courage to stop for what truly matters. And those who dare to trust the unexpected often find the rewards come faster and richer than they ever imagined. She woke up early that day, heart racing and palms sweaty. She had an interview scheduled that could change her life. Finally, a chance to leave all the struggle behind. She put on her best clothes, rehearsed answers in her head, and stepped outside with a nervous smile. But the city felt different that morning. The cloudy sky, the sharp wind, and the people, always rushing, barely noticed anything beyond their own steps. It was in the middle of that chaos that she saw him, an old man standing still on the sidewalk, as if time moved differently for him. He looked completely out of place, almost like he had been forgotten by time itself. His clothes were simple, worn-out shoes on his feet, an old burlap sack slung over his back. People hurried past him, barely giving a second glance, as if he were just part of the scenery. But she felt something different. She couldn't explain why, but there was a kindness in his eyes, a calmness that stood in stark contrast to the city's constant rush. And even though she knew the clock was ticking mercilessly toward her interview, her feet moved toward him as if pulled by something greater. "Are you lost, sir?" she asked, trying to hide the anxiety tightening in her chest. He smiled, a small, genuine smile, the kind you rarely see anymore. He asked for help carrying his sack a few blocks down to the bank. Every second that ticked by screamed at her about the opportunity she was letting slip away. But something in the way he stood there made it impossible to walk away. Sometimes it's the moments we least expect that rewrite our entire story, even if, at the time, they feel like mere detours. She took a deep breath, gripped a heavy sack, and unknowingly carried the first step of a journey that would change her life forever. The walk to the bank felt much longer than she remembered. Every block they crossed was a battle against the ticking clock, and against that voice in her head questioning if she was doing the right thing. The old man walked slowly, savoring each step, while she kept sneaking glances at her watch, feeling time slip through her fingers. Still, something deep inside wouldn't let her leave. How often in life are we given a chance to choose something bigger than ourselves? Sometimes what looks like a loss is actually the first step toward a much greater victory we can't yet see. Finally, the bank came into view, tall and polished, like a fortress of modern ambition. The revolving doors spun endlessly, swallowing up people too busy to notice the world around them. She looked at the building, then at the old man, who now smiled as if arriving home. Without a second thought, she helped him lower the sack onto the floor near the entrance. "Thank you, dear," he said, his voice thick with gratitude that felt almost sacred. She smiled back, a knot forming in her chest, knowing full well her interview was already underway, and with it, her carefully planned opportunity slipping away. Before she could turn to leave, he gently touched her arm and said, "Please, stay with me for a moment." There was something in his voice, a quiet authority wrapped in kindness, that made her pause. She didn't know why, but she stayed. And then the unexpected unfolded. The old man straightened his back, took a deep breath, and walked into the bank as if he owned it. And in a way that she couldn't possibly understand yet, maybe he did. Sometimes, life pulls you out of your best laid plans just to put you exactly where you're meant to be. Even if at first, it feels like everything is falling apart. Inside the bank, the world seemed to spin in its usual busy blur. People rushed around, eyes glued to their phones. Lives packed into tight schedules with no room for surprises. But when the old man walked in, something shifted. It was as if a silent presence had entered, paused in the air itself. He walked calmly to the center of the lobby, placed his sack on the polished floor, and lifted his gaze with a quiet intensity that didn't match his worn appearance. "This bank belongs to me," he declared. And for a moment, time itself stood still. The employees glanced at each other, first with confusion, then with half-hidden smiles. A few customers chuckled under their breath, assuming he was just a harmless old man lost in his memories. But there was something in his eyes that made even the boldest laughter die quickly. Without raising his voice, he pulled a bundle of yellowed papers from his sack and began spreading them out on the floor. Ancient documents, stamped and sealed, telling a story that had long been buried. In an instant, this man, who moments ago had been invisible to the world, became the undeniable center of it. She stood nearby, heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in the heavy silence. She didn't know whether to leave, step closer, or simply stay frozen. But deep down, she knew she was witnessing something that didn't happen every day. Stories like this, the ones that rewrite everything you thought you knew, don't knock twice. Maybe this was why life had led her here, at this exact moment, in this exact place. Sometimes, life shatters your well-planned routine just to show you that the real story was never on your schedule to begin with. A low murmur spread through the lobby, like a gust of wind sneaking into a still room. People started to gather in a loose circle around the old man and his scattered papers. Some tried to hide their curiosity. Others shamelessly pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Funny how just a moment ago no one wanted anything to do with him. And now, he was the center of attention. But he didn't seem to care about the stares or the phones. His focus was entirely on the documents in front of him, as if he carried the weight of an entire forgotten era. Among the scattered papers, an old deed caught her eye. Handwritten, faded, yet still official-looking, complete with seals and signatures barely clinging to the page. She leaned in closer, feeling that what was happening wasn't just a random scene from a busy day. It was history clawing its way back into present. The old man glanced at her and, with surprising gentleness, handed her one of the documents. "Read it for me, would you, dear?" he asked, his voice lined with years. Her hands trembled slightly, but she read aloud. It was a land deed dated decades ago, proving that the ground the bank was built on once belonged to his family. The realization dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Gasps, whispers, nervous shifting. Reality had cracked open, and something long hidden was stepping into the light. She realized, standing there with his papers in her hands, that she wasn't just a bystander anymore. Somehow, she had been pulled into something much bigger than missed interviews and resumes. Life has a way of yanking you out of your narrow plans to show you that your real story, the one you were meant to live, might just be unfolding when you least expect it. The bank manager, a sharp-suited man with a wary look, finally approached. His body language said it all. He wasn't about to waste time on an old man's story. But as he skimmed through the documents, his expression shifted. Confusion first, then concern. He called over one of the senior staff members and whispered something in his ear, glancing nervously at the growing crowd. It was clear now, this wasn't just some harmless old man making wild claims. This was something real, and sometimes reality shows up at the most inconvenient moments. The young woman still held a few of the papers the old man had handed her. They felt heavy now, like they carried more than ink and signatures. They carried forgotten truths. The old man didn't seem the least bit rattled. He simply stood there with the calmness of someone who has fought battles no one ever saw. In that moment, she realized something profound. Some of the hardest battles in life are fought in silence, with no cameras, no applause, only faith, persistence, and dignity. And often, the only witnesses are God and your own heart. A few minutes later, two more men in expensive suits emerged from the back offices, holding sleek binders and crisp new documents, as if they could cover decades of history with bureaucracy. But the old man didn't flinch. He simply smiled and asked, politely but firmly, to speak with the director. "I'll wait," he said, as if he had all the time in the world. And somehow, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Sometimes being in the right place means choosing patience over opportunity. And life always finds a way to reward those who understand the timing of things. Time seemed to melt inside the bank. The people who had been rushing moments ago now lingered, caught in the strange gravity of the moment. The young woman sat down beside the old man, still clutching the documents he had trusted her with. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes we lose what we think matters, only to find what truly does." His words, simple but heavy, settled deep in her chest. How many times had she cried over doors that closed, not realizing they might have been protecting her from something she wasn't ready to see? Finally, the bank's director emerged, flanked by lawyers and uneasy smiles. He was a large man, dressed in a suit so crisp it looked bulletproof, the kind of person who learned long ago how to hide panic behind polished words. But even he hesitated when he saw the documents. There were polite exchanges, thinly veiled skepticism, empty promises of careful review. The old man simply nodded, patient as a tree that's seen 100 storms. She realized then, real strength isn't loud. It's standing firm when everything inside you screams to give up. It's knowing your truth needs no approval. As she watched him, she couldn't help but reflect on her own life, how often she had chased validation from bosses, interviews, and resumes. Here was a man who needed none of that. His worth wasn't something others could grant or deny. And in that still, charged moment, she understood, true value isn't about being recognized. It's about recognizing yourself. Maybe missing that interview wasn't a loss after all. Maybe it was a start of seeing life with different eyes, eyes that would never again mistake noise for meaning. Hours dragged by, thick and slow, as if time itself had forgotten how to move. The old man remained seated, back straight, gaze steady on the director's door. No anger, no anxiety. Just a quiet endurance of someone who had learned long ago that life rewards those who wait with patience, not those who rush. The young woman watched him with growing admiration. How many times had she fallen apart over the smallest setbacks? Yet here he sat, teaching her, without a single lecture, that sometimes the greatest strength is simply refusing to be shaken. When the director finally returned, he wasn't alone. This time he brought a new offer, a hefty settlement check in exchange for the old man's silence. Enough money to change most people's lives overnight. But the old man simply smiled, kind but firm, and shook his head. He didn't want the money. He wanted justice. He wanted the truth restored, the family name honored. In that instant, the young woman felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't about property or pride. It was about dignity, the kind that can't be bought. And somehow, she knew she would never see life the same way again. Amid the tension so thick you could almost touch it, the old man turned to her and said, "When you fight for what's right, dear, the reward will come. Maybe not today, maybe not how you expect, but it always comes." His words, simple and full of quiet certainty, branded themselves into her heart. Sometimes life feels unfair not because it's punishing you, but because it's testing who you are when no one's watching. And soon enough, she would see just how life rewards those who dare to stand their ground. With no easy way out, the bank proposed a formal meeting to properly resolve the situation. They scheduled it for a few days later and politely asked the old man and his companion to leave for now. Still processing everything she had witnessed, the young woman walked alongside him, the old burlap sack swinging lightly across his back. He looked almost weightless now. How could someone carry so much history and yet walk as if nothing could burden him? Maybe real freedom isn't about holding on tightly. It's about letting go when it matters most. They stopped at a small park nearby, and he sat down on a worn wooden bench, greeting the pigeons like old friends. Without any rush, he started telling stories about his childhood, about the family farm that was stolen away piece by piece, about dreams lost and battles fought quietly. They weren't grand or flashy tales, just simple, raw memories, the kind the world doesn't have time to hear anymore. Sitting there, listening under the overcast sky, she realized every person carries an entire universe inside them if someone would only stop long enough to listen. Before they parted ways, the old man reached into his pocket and handed her a yellowed envelope. "For you," he said simply, with a look that seemed to say far more than his words. She tucked it carefully into her bag, not wanting to appear rude. She promised she would return for the meeting, and in that moment, Looking into his steady, knowing eyes, she felt something stir inside her, a quiet certainty that life was weaving something far bigger than she could understand. Sometimes, the greatest gifts aren't the ones that flash. They're the ones that settle deep in your heart and change you forever. The days that followed stretched endlessly, each hour weighed down with anticipation. The young woman found it nearly impossible to focus on anything else. She turned down job offers, ignored concerned looks from friends and family, and waited. Doubt crept in from time to time. Was she foolish to put so much faith into a story that sounded almost too extraordinary to be real? But every time the doubts whispered, she remembered the old man's steady gaze. Sometimes real faith means standing firm even when you have no guarantees. On the day of the meeting, she put on the same outfit she had worn for the interview she had missed, not to impress anyone, but to honor the moment. When she arrived at the bank, she spotted the old man already sitting on the steps outside, smiling at passers-by with the same serene expression. Her heart pounded as they were called inside. This time, in addition to the director and the lawyers, there was a new face, a representative from the city's Historical Preservation Society. He was sharp-eyed, thorough, the kind of man who didn't waste words or overlook details. The meeting began tense, just as she expected. The bank tried once again to sweep the issue away with generous offers and hollow apologies. But the old man, calm and unshaken, simply waited. When the Historical Society representative finally spoke, everything shifted. He confirmed the authenticity of the old documents and stated that the bank had, indeed, wrongfully built on private property decades ago. It was a stunning moment, the kind you only witness once in a lifetime. And right then, she realized she wasn't just witnessing a victory. She was witnessing proof that sometimes miracles were ordinary clothes. With no more cards to play, the bank was forced to acknowledge its mistake. They offered a much larger settlement, along with a public ceremony to honor the old man's family and correct the historical record. He accepted, not because of the money, but because dignity had finally been restored. When the meeting ended, he shook hands with the bank officials, steady and calm, like a man who had never doubted the outcome. The young woman stood by, overwhelmed by emotion. Sometimes, the true victories aren't flashy or loud. They are quiet, rooted in patience, principle, and a heart unwilling to give up. As they stepped outside into the crisp air, the old man pulled her into a strong embrace, the kind that somehow says everything words cannot. "You missed a job interview, dear," he whispered, "but you gained something far greater." And just like that, he smiled warmly and disappeared in the crowd, as if he had completed a mission only he truly understood. She stood there for a long moment, replaying his words. Then she remembered the envelope he had given her. With trembling hands, she opened it right there on the steps. Inside, she found a handwritten note, for the one who saw what no one else did. Along with it was a business card from one of the most prestigious companies in the city, a place she had always dreamed of working. The card came with a personal invitation to interview, signed by none other than the company's owner, the old man's nephew. Life, with all its twists, had led her exactly where she needed to be. Sometimes, losing what you thought you needed is just life clearing the way for something unimaginably better.